Hello and welcome to the Our Prenup Lawyer podcast, where you and I get to learn more about prenups as I interview professionals from the fields of family law, couples counseling, and wealth management. I'm your host, Libby Garabedian. Let's get started. The information provided in this podcast is prepared by Our Prenup Lawyer for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship. This is not legal advice or a substitute for obtaining legal advice from an attorney. A person listening or watching should not rely upon it in any manner without engaging professional counsel. The podcast is intended to communicate general information and, because recorded, may not be current. On this episode of the Our Prenup Lawyer podcast, we have Jacqueline Newman. Jacqueline is a managing partner of Berkman Bottger Newman Schein LLP, where she focuses on litigation, collaborative law, and mediation, specializing in high net worth matrimonial cases and prenuptial agreements. She is the author of The New Rules of Divorce, 12 Secrets to Protecting Your Wealth, Health, and Happiness, and is a frequent legal commentator featured in major media outlets, including the New York Times, NBC, CBS, and Fox Business. In addition to her practice, Jacqueline teaches divorce processes as an adjunct professor at Cardozo School of Law and has previously taught family law at Fordham University School of Law. Recognized as a leader in her field, she has earned accolades such as Chambers and Partners recognition, Martindale Hubbell's AV Preeminent rating, and inclusion in Super Lawyers' Top 100 New York City Lawyers. Beyond her legal work, she co-founded the Gift of Giving Store, a charitable initiative supporting families impacted by domestic abuse. Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for being on the episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's go ahead and get started. I want to talk about your career in family law. How did you get started out?
So it's kind of a funny story. I actually have always wanted to be a family lawyer since I was in middle school, which is so bizarre because who wants to be a matrimonial attorney in middle school? And my parents were both psychotherapists. So the big family joke is I was too aggressive to be a therapist. And I just loved the law. So the combination of relationships and the law I thought was just fascinating. I focused fully on this all throughout basically high school, all throughout college. I did an internship with a matrimonial attorney in college. And then when I went to law school, again, all eggs in one basket. Thank God it worked out. I had gone to my professor, Barry Berkman, at the end of class, asked if he was hiring. At the time, he said the person he was working with was leaving to go follow the Grateful Dead. So he said, come on board. And I've been here ever since. I've been here. I've never interviewed anywhere else. I don't have a resume. I now own the firm. And so I started as an intern and moved my way up. And I've been here, I guess, maybe over 25 years, I guess, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, and I love it.
That's amazing. Yeah. And like you said, now you're a named managing partner and you've really made a mark for yourself.
Thank you.
So in your practice, you do collaborative law and mediation. Can you go into the skill set required for that and how that's different than traditional litigation?
Sure. So mediation, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's when you work with one person who's a neutral, and each person generally does not have attorneys in the room, but they, at least when I'm acting in the mediator capacity, I am very, very adamant that people have attorneys. I call them mediation-friendly attorneys, people that are going to kind of help guide them through the process. Because as a mediator, you're neutral. And so it's very important that you have people that are looking at the case from their lens. So it's very important that they have outside attorneys. And then collaborative law, for people that are not familiar, is basically a process. You go through a lot of training and you enter into an agreement saying you're not going to go to court. So there's a very big push on settlement. The kicker to it is that in the event that the process breaks down, and again, like mediation, it's voluntary. Either person can say they don't want to do this anymore. At that point, you can no longer represent those attorneys, those clients in litigation. So for an example, if I was working with, let's say, the husband, we think the collaborative process is going great. And then all of a sudden the wife says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Not only am I out, but my entire firm is out. So again, a really big push on settlement. And the other thing that's very nice about the collaborative process is that it's an interdisciplinary approach. So you bring in a divorce coach, you can bring in financial experts, and also a child specialist applicable. I always say I'm the most expensive player on the team. Why wouldn't you work with these other specialists? But I think collaborative is a great process to use when mediation, people may feel they want someone in the room with them to kind of help push the process and maybe, voice them when they feel like they can't. So from a skill set, they are very, very different. Even though I can say my training from mediation and collaborative law I definitely feel like it's very helpful for me in the litigation capacity. And I think one thing specifically with matrimonial law is that people think that you need to see the inside of a courtroom to get divorced, and that's just simply not true. Even litigation, as it's defined, really just means it's not the other two process choices. So you can be negotiating a case and maybe never see the inside of a courtroom. There is a different mindset, though, because of the fact that when you're in the mediation, when you're a mediator, you're obviously in the neutral capacity. When you're a collaborative attorney, you're kind of in the mindset of you want to figure out what's going to work for the family. While there is definitely, you are advocating for your client, it's a little bit broader, I think. And litigation is, much more so I am protecting my client's interests. So, and you even think about it with mediation and collaborative law, you say, husband with wife. You don't say versus wife, as opposed to in a litigation, it's very clear that it's one versus the other.
That makes sense. Yeah, you're trying to bring both sides to some sort of agreement where you really are representing in litigation one person against the other.
Yes, that is. And it is an unfortunate situation in many cases, especially for, in divorce law, because there are children involved. And while I do litigate, and right now I'm litigating a little more than I'd like to, I can tell you that it is definitely should almost always be the last choice. It's a very, very expensive process. It's emotionally expensive. It's financially expensive. I think people have these, TV-esque versions. They go into court and, they get to say whatever they want and they get to be brought to justice and all of that. And it's just not the truth. It's not the way the process works. It's also incredibly slow. So again, sometimes it has to be done. And I definitely think that, there's always going to be a place for litigation. But I do think that when people think they're going to run to court, they should think twice.
So you deal with high net worth individuals. How is that, without getting into too much detail, how is that different than, maybe middle class couples who are divorcing where they don't have as many assets or they don't have the same properties, that kind of thing?
So, it is different. I mean, so to one degree, you are dealing with people that aren't scared about not being able to eat, so you have that kind of fear away as opposed to a case that people are really living paycheck to paycheck. And that obviously adds an additional strain because two households are more expensive than one. That said, everybody lives in their own, microcosm. And so even in the high net worth space, while yes, they're not scared of not eating, they are very nervous about their lifestyle changing. And so you're also dealing with much more complex assets, much more complex income structures. We deal a lot with business owners. I mean, personally, I find it fascinating because I feel like I learn a little bit about every kind of topic there is. I learn about all different types of businesses. I learn about the entertainment business. I learn about hedge funds. I learn about so much that I'm always learning from my clients. I always joke that, at a cocktail party, I can always say like one or two things about pretty much most of these topics. And I'm pretty good for like one or two lines and then I need to stop. But I do find it all so incredibly interesting. So you are dealing with that type of thing. You're also dealing, the taxes get very, very complex. So, I personally love the finances. I love Excel and I do everything on Excel. My children's birthday parties are done on Excel. So for me, the more complex, the better. But, a lot of attorneys don't love numbers. I love numbers. But I can say that is probably a difference. Not to mention the fact that you're also dealing very often with a team. A lot of my clients have family offices. So you're dealing with people that have, they may have trust and estate attorneys on board. They may have accountants that they work with. They may have business managers. So there's usually a team of, involved, which personally I find very helpful because a lot of times, the client, is emotionally charged in these situations and doesn't want to be dealing with going back through credit card statements or doing a lot of the tasks that are going to seem very emotionally triggering, not to mention time consuming. And so it's nice when they have, a bunch of people that work with them and are very familiar with their finances and are able to kind of assist in the divorce process.
So you commented or you spoke to Fox News about the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce prenup, and obviously everyone is aware of their marriage, their engagement. What is the common practice for prenups, engagement timelines when you have high net worth individuals?
So I like to say that the earlier the better. I can tell you that I definitely get phone calls of people saying, I'm getting married in a couple of weeks. Can you just draft something quick for me? And I'm always like, oh, so not the way it works. But yes, I mean, I think that, it actually, there can be more simplicity. A lot of times we deal with family money cases, generational wealth. That's sort of easier. People think, and really, a lot of times when I have these conversations with families that are wealthy, they might not even need a prenup, because a lot of it is estate planning. A lot of it, they have money in trust. They have money, that are just so protected that they may not even need the prenup, but everybody seems to think they need one. It's like kind of one of those passing of, in the crib, they start talking about the fact that you'll always need a prenup no matter who you marry. So it's kind of a family tradition. But they're not really sometimes needed in the same capacity. They can get more challenging, especially, family businesses are one of the most challenging, because, you have a situation where you may have the person getting married that works for the family business, but then they want to protect the family business. But now you're in a situation where the income is going to be, in typical situations, income would be marital, but then they say, no, we don't want the income to be marital because we want you to leave the family business alone. And it's like this cycle that's hard because there's so much emotional tie to it. And you don't want people saying, you're marrying me for my money. So there's a sensitivity to all of this. I find them really, challenging, but in a good way. A lot of people find them to be unromantic. I think that at the end of the day, it actually can be a really beneficial thing to a marriage, because you learn to have difficult conversations about money. And a lot of people don't talk about money and what money means to them, and, what it symbolizes, because it's amazing how much money, isn't always just about being able to eat. It's, it means a lot. There's a lot of power involved. There's control involved. There's so many things. Like, the psychology of money is fascinating. And you see a lot of that when you're negotiating prenuptial agreements. The cases, like, if you look at, specifically, if you want to look at the Taylor Swift case, my guess, as I said, previously, it's going to be actually pretty simple. Like, people think these things are going to be so complex. And actually, sometimes when you have that much money, it's really simple. It's kind of like yours is yours, mine is mine, and that's the end of it. They don't need to build a marital, pot together. It's not about that. For them, it's going to be much more about building a family together, and it's going to be much less about the money as much as it will be about, the rest of their lives.
Can you share some of the more interesting or unconventional prenuptial terms or divorce terms that you've run into?
So I will tell you the common one that people come to is they get a lot of the infidelity clauses. You get a lot of people that say, if he cheats or she cheats, I want, money, or I want, something. And I try to talk everyone out of them. I think, I probably have done thousands of prenups at this point. I think I've maybe done one or two of them, and really with clearly very much against my will. They are, part of it is that I say, first of all, how do you define cheating? Like, let's just start with that. Obviously, if people have sex, okay, that's an easy one. But what about emotional affairs? A lot of times that could be more damaging than, a physical affair. And what happens if, the example I give is, let's say someone goes to give someone a kiss goodbye on the cheek, and the person turns their head last minute, and then they kiss on the lips. Is that an affair? Or how long does the kiss have to actually last? And, do they have to open their mouths? You can get so into detail on this. And so it really becomes such an incredibly challenging thing to write. And it's really about the intention. So I very often, kind of talk people out of it. The one thing that, and this is one of my strange ones, is I represented the husband, and he was the one who wanted the infidelity clause, because, and this is one of the two I've done, this is one of them, where he said, it will stop me from cheating. I was like, wow. I was like, okay, if that's what you feel you need. I was like, okay. So that was a weird one. But, we've had people that, have done some sillier things, I've had people come to me and I've said no on things such as, weight type things. And I've said absolutely no to that. I've had ones where people said that, someone once tried to do a sex one. We have to have sex a certain amount of times a week. So I was like, no, so I've had some other requests, which I will not engage with, because that's just silly.
So how enforceable are some of those cheating clauses when there's so much ambiguity involved?
So I don't think they're particularly enforceable. In all my years, I've never had a situation where anything has ever been enforced to that degree. I think there's some case someone told me about in California where there was something that happened. I really can't speak to it. It was more of a kind of a wives' tale than whether it really happened or not. But I don't see them to be particularly enforceable. Now, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be. And I guess if something is very clean cut, if somebody has a blatant affair and, is having sex with someone and they know they are and they admit it, or whatever it is that happens, I guess something could happen to that effect. I've never seen it. And, and as I said, it's more of a threat type thing. And a lot of times when people come to me on it, I said, well, you guys have to have a real conversation, because if this is something you're scared about, you should be talking about that. That sounds like a little bit of marriage counseling before marriage, because you want to get to a point where you feel strong enough that you don't feel like you have to be like my client and put it in to stop him from doing it.
Now, I want to switch gears a little and talk about some of your achievements outside of law. You published a book in 2020, The New Rules of Divorce, 12 Secrets to Protecting Your Wealth, Health, and Happiness. And you also co-founded the Gift of Giving store. So I want to talk about your book first. How did you decide on what material was essential to include?
That's a good question, actually, and no one's actually asked me that. I would say for me, what I was really, one of the real purposes of the book, beyond it being like a bucket list type thing, I can tell you I'm not writing another book. It took a few years of my life, but I think, I have people that come in and so often they say, they have the same questions, similar questions, similar concerns, which makes sense. And, look, meeting attorneys is expensive. And, a lot of people charge for their consultations, as we do. And so I wanted people to be as educated as possible. And so I wanted them to be educated when coming in to their consultations so they can be asking real questions and really kind of getting the most of those meetings. But the other part about it is that I really try to normalize the feelings that people experience going through divorce. And so, and I've been doing this long enough that you see patterns in people. You see, when someone walks in the door, I can pretty much guess more or less what they're going to say. But I think that, divorce feels extremely lonely, and it feels like it's only happened to you, and everything feels so incredibly personal, which absolutely makes sense. And I say when people are going through divorce, they're very narcissistic, and it's not a shame to them. It's just that your whole world, as you've seen it, is crumbling. And so, you become very, protective and defensive, and there's just so many emotions that go with it, and sad. And I wanted people to know, like, that's what happens. Like, this is part of the process. And so for me, it was very important for people I wanted them to be able to read this as a first step to, first of all, just kind of come to a calm with it and understand that what you're going through makes sense. And, some of the things that people do when they're angry, for an example, like, don't do that. And so I wanted to really be able to kind of give more direction from an emotional standpoint, as well as giving some, not legal guidance to the degree that it's personal to their case, but more general legal advice that will put them in the best position so they can be educated, they can understand it, and kind of just take a breath before they move forward in the process. But I will say, like, one of the first things I say in my book and in my consultations is, are you sure you want to get divorced? And when people hesitate, I say, go see a marriage counselor. Like, do not go through this unless you are 100% sure. It's, as I said, emotionally expensive, financially expensive, everything about it's very hard to turn back. And so for me, that's part of the beginning right there, is really analyze it. Like, are you ready not to have your children under your roof every night? Like, are you ready not to have holidays every holiday? And if you pause on that, you're not ready to get divorced, because this is part of the process. And so I just think it's very important, because people get emotional, and especially like during COVID, it was everybody called me and was like, get me out of here. And I was like, take a minute, just breathe for a second. And I just think that people act fast because emotions run high. I think social media plays a large role in it. Everybody sees, their Facebook, perfect marriages. And, it's funny, I see some of this and I think to myself, really? Because they were in my office last week, So, I mean, it's, it's just kind of funny, but I do think it puts a lot of pressure on people. So I wanted to normalize the process. I wanted them to understand kind of the way this may play out, and really give a little bit of a splash of a cold water too, because everyone's got a story and half of them aren't true. And so I just think it's really important for people to know, like, a little bit more of the facts of the way the process works.
There's some common misconceptions people have about divorce and the reality of the process, like you're talking about, where acknowledging their emotions and these shared experiences. What are things that people think are true about divorce that aren't really?
That affairs make a big difference. I mean, that's the number one. People come in and they have all this proof, and they've hired private investigators and all these things. And I say, I know that was so painful, and I understand. I was like, but a court doesn't want to hear it. Like, they are not interested. And I think that it's just so hard for someone, a pill to swallow. I think that so many people feel so betrayed, understandably, and they can't believe that a court's not going to give them all the assets or everything they want or any of that sort of stuff, or custody, because somebody was a bad spouse. It doesn't make them a bad parent. And that's a very, very hard thing to understand, understandably. So I think that is probably the number one thing that people come in and just think that's going to happen. The other thing is, I think they're going to get their day in court. I can tell you that you get about 6 minutes in court, and you'll spend, tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to get those 6 minutes. And you're one of thousands of cases. And while the judges, I think, do the best they can, they're grossly overworked and understaffed. So it's just not this, people think they're going to get this big relief. And, so many times people walk out and they're just so disappointed. And, I've had clients that I've sent to court beforehand and said, sit there for the day and watch how quick this goes. Watch that when a judge yells, don't get excited because they'd be yelling at the next person the same way. You know what I mean? You'll see the routines, you'll see like the way it works. I just think that, as I said, TV and movies and, everybody has a story and a friend that they think it's going to be a certain way and it's just not. And so I think it's, a very big, the reality of court, I think is something that most people just truly don't understand.
Have any of your philosophies or practices around divorce changed through the course of your career?
That's a good question too. Yes, I would say that, as I've, matured as a person, before I was married, when I was married, when I had children, through each stage of my life, I think I'm gaining better insight into other people's lives. There's a difference between understanding and like understanding, and so while I understood, I think from the beginning I was trained and, and I have a lot of empathy for people and I really truly care about my clients, like really, like I truly think about them at night. When you have a child, like I think I didn't understand, for an example, in the beginning when people would fight about, you fight about custody, obviously I understood, but when you'd fight about those extra 5 minutes, no, the pickup has to be at 7:15. No, it has to be at 7:20. Like this sort of stuff, I'd be like, who cares? Like I think I was didn't understand why it was important for them, even though even now I'd say who cares, but I can understand it. Having a child, having children, understanding why that feels so important to you at that moment. I get that now in a way that I think I just didn't really understand. I still have the same advice to my clients as I had before, but I can understand more so where they're coming from. I may or may not word myself differently from those experiences. And I think, like, again, as you continue to go through this, I would say like numbers don't faze me. You could have $10 billion and I'm not going to blink, and I think probably when I was younger, I would be like, oh my God. And now like nothing. Like it doesn't, it doesn't process any differently than anything else. So I think that element of just being, used to these type of worlds. And I've learned, as I said, so much about just so much business and the way that comp structures are and just how creative so many people are. It's kind of fascinating.
Have you seen the field of family law change as a whole?
I have. So, over the years since I've been practicing, I mean, beyond the fact when I was practicing, I feel like this dates me very much. There was fault. So that was a whole really big, complex way to litigate. You had to, basically sometimes make up, reasons to get divorced. And it was just awful and just a really bad situation, to say the least. And we had trials on people and they didn't get divorced and they had to move to New Jersey. And it was just, there was a lot going on there that wasn't great. So seeing that gone has been great. The other thing I would say that I've seen a shift in is that as more women are in the workforce, as more women are becoming the breadwinners and that sort of thing, spousal support, maintenance, alimony, it's all the same thing. I've definitely seen a shift. People aren't getting lifetime maintenance. People aren't getting, these numbers that they were once getting. And so I think that is also when you talked about even before about the differences and things that people don't, the myths or whatever, people have these images of, I'm going to make the same amount of money. They're going to keep me in my lifestyle I'm accustomed to, all of that sort of stuff. And it's just not happening to the same degree. So I think that is something that people don't understand when they're getting divorced. And, when I went back and talk about, are you ready? I said, are you ready for your lifestyle to switch? Like, are you ready not to shop the way you want to? You're ready not to dine out, no vacations to change. Like, be ready for this, because it will change. Like, you're not going to probably get the same amount of money that you were getting, that you were spending before, because it's just going to be different. So I think that's another thing I'm seeing a major shift in, and I can see the trend continuing.
As more women enter the workforce, and there obviously is that shift where women are higher earners, there's this more financial independence and financial literacy. Do you see the difference in demographics between who's getting a prenup now and before?
I feel like prenups have become kind of almost trendy. I would say in the last, call it maybe 5 to 7 years, I've had people getting it that don't have money. And they say, well, I plan to have money one day. It's like, okay. It's really, before it was probably old money. I think that was what the begin. And then it became business owners, which makes a lot of sense. Then it became people that had such income differentials. And I would say it always was second marriages. You always had the children from the first marriage who were always yours. And now, yes, now I'm seeing people all over the map that are getting them. Young people, I think the stigma has also lessened, at least I can say in New York specifically, and I say to people, if anything was 50% chance, how is it not considered normalized? I know that sounds so sad, but, I say all the time, if there was a 50% chance of you like getting in an accident, if you were going to go in a car, would you get in that car? Probably not, So I think that it sort of makes sense that people are protecting themselves in divorce. People are also getting married later. You're seeing that. So they're also more financially set usually. And so you're seeing a lot more prenups from that perspective as well.
Now I want to shift to our final topic, the gift of giving store. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd love to tell you about that. That's like my passion project of all projects. So I actually do it with my daughter, my now 17-year-old daughter. And so what it is that we go into domestic abuse shelters and we create these pop-up stores. And what happens is the children will come and they will shop, quote, shop for their moms, and they will get gifts for their mom for Mother's Day. And the way that they pay for them is that they pay for them with statements of self-affirmation. So let's say that, someone wants to get a purse for their mom. The statement may be, the price tag may be, say 3 things you love about yourself. And then what will happen is the child will then go to the gift bag station, which they usually like the gift bag station more than anything else. And they pick out their pretty gift bag. And then they go to the cashier station. At the cashier station, they have to write down their answers on these like pretty little papers that the mom will receive. Because for me, it's very important that the moms see that these kids do love, have self-love, because there's so much guilt and everything associated with and worry, obviously, about children when you're dealing with people that have experienced domestic abuse and then are living in shelters to the fact that they're out of their homes for that reason. And then there's a coupon tree where they have to pick out a coupon for their mom. And the coupons will be things like give your mom an extra 2 minutes of quiet time, or tell your mom a joke, or, just something like that. And then, and there's also like self-affirmation stickers and all sorts of positive things and pencils with pretty like things and stuff. And they get a little mirror that says, in case you forgot you're awesome, here's your reminder, and you open it up. But then like my absolute favorite part of it is to pay the tax. So in order to pay the tax, we have these little heart mirrors, and they have to look in the mirror and they have to say something that they love about themselves. And it is so cute and so nice. And like, I remember there's this little boy, he was maybe 8 years old. He's like, I am good looking. It was so cute. And we do arts and crafts there, and we do, they make their Mother's Day cards and little gifts and all sorts of things. It's just, I can't explain how rewarding it is. And to see that, and for me, it's very important also because I want these children to, see their mothers as separate people. I think that's super important. So the moms are not usually there. The moms are usually like in some sort of session or something like that. And this is in the children's area. And I usually buy gifts that I would want. These are, I get like weighted eye masks, and they're very pampering type gifts. And I try to stay away from gifts that I think the kids would want for themselves. The only thing I do is I do have this one big box of chocolates that I'll give, which usually goes very fast. But I want the kids to, I say, like, what do you think your mom would like? Does your mom like, does she get cold at night? Like, does she like puzzles? Does she, what's her favorite color? So I want them to start thinking of their mothers separately. And then again, for the moms, I want them to be celebrated to be moms. I think it's, a lot of identity gets created as being a domestic abuse victim or things like that. And so for me, it's so important for them to be a mom and to be celebrated and to know that their kids are doing well and to know their kids love them and, love themselves. And I just think it's been such an incredibly rewarding process. And, and just meeting all these adorable little kids has been great too. So it's been really nice.
How did this idea get started?
So, all right, I'm going to date myself even more. So for my 50th birthday, I started it. So I was basically, I guess, a little more than a year ago. And it was my present to myself. Like I pretty much said, I want to do something that, I love planning parties. I always say I should have been a party planner. So, to me, it's all about that. And like, it's so, I make these things like very, very pretty, and we have a whole backdrop, and it's like a whole to-do. I did it with my daughter, as I said, who, to do something with a teenage daughter is like nice that she'd play with me. So that was really, really nice. And it's great for her. And she actually works at one of the shelters we do a lot of work with, and she's great with kids. And I just, for me, I love getting gifts. I think about also the other part is like when my kids were little, I don't know if you remember this, but you'd like buy gifts for your parents, like at those little school stores, and you'd get them a keychain that says mom is the best. And I'd always say like, I don't even have keys, but thank you. I wouldn't say that. They would be so excited to give it to me. And so I sort of wanted to recreate that feeling also for the kids. Like, so for an example, like the way I think about this, if the child buys, let's say, a scarf for their mom, and then every time the mom wears that scarf, it's such an empowering type of relationship. Like I used to get, my kids would get so excited when I'd have my keychain, and I remember buying it for my mom. And I remember like when she'd use my keychain, I'd be so psyched, or she'd like use my little mirror that said best mom ever, number one mom. Like there was just such a connection that was so important for kids at that age. And so I wanted to recreate that for the kids. I wanted to recreate it for the moms. And yeah, I just, for me, it was just so important. And being a mother is a huge part of my identity. And I wanted to kind of share that joy with these other moms who are just going through a tough time. So yeah, and I love it. I think it's just so fun.
That's wonderful. That's such an amazing passion to have, and to put it out there for everyone to share that love. If listeners are interested in connecting with you or getting involved with the Gift of Giving store, what's the best way to reach you?
So they can go onto the giftofgivingstore.com. So there's a website that kind of gives everything. And, for me, part of my goal on this, which is a lofty goal, I acknowledge, is I really want there to be a gift of giving store in every domestic abuse shelter in the United States for Mother's Day. Obviously, I recognize that's going to be tough. But my goal on this is that, I want other people to throw them. And so I would help people, do that. And I had someone do it, one in Portland. I've had some people do it in Pennsylvania. Like I've had people do them other places. And, I send them some of the information. We help. It was a charitable project. I was, to be honest, self-funding, but now I'm actually in the midst of creating it to be an actual charity. So there could be donations, in which case I could help donate to people to be able to buy the gifts and things like that. And so if anyone is interested in throwing one for Mother's Day, I'd be more than happy to help them structure it. I just think, again, it couldn't be more rewarding, and it's not grossly time consuming. And when you go on my website, I have like the coupons on there. Like I have everything. I really I've actually have like the gifts you can just hit Amazon. I really made it very simple for people to be able to do this. And as I said, they can contact me, and I'd be happy to walk anyone through the process. It's such a rewarding thing to do. And so I encourage everyone to do it, give back.
Awesome. I think that's a wonderful goal to have, and it's definitely set up where it's going to make a big impact.
I hope so.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on this episode, and it was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That's our show, folks. Thank you for listening to our Prenup Lawyer. Make sure to like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment below. Follow us on Instagram at Our Prenup Lawyer, and listen to us on Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and watch us on YouTube. See you guys next time.